The area of teaching phonics comes with a lot of controversy, and some of those controversies lead into conversations worth having, and some don't. So today I want to talk to you about what I believe is actually worth your time and energy and what isn't. If you're new here, my name is Anna Geiger. I'm the author of Reach All Readers, host of the Reach All Readers podcast, and creator of the Reach All Readers Plus membership. And my mission is to help K to third grade teachers bridge the gap between reading research and what we do in the classroom every day. So here's the phonics fight number one that is not worth having, in my opinion. And that is, should we call them blends or consonant clusters? So you may know that a blend is when you have two or more consonants together that each retain their own sound. So we might have a two-letter blend, SP as in spin, or a three-letter blend, SPL as in splash. Some people call them consonant clusters, just because that's another thing to call them, and also because they would say blend is a verb. We can't use blend as a noun. I don't think it's really that big of a deal as long as you're consistent in what you call them. So across the grade level to the next grade and then into intervention, all of you need to agree on the terminology that you're going to use. What is important to talk about is the fact that we should not teach blends as little bits of code that students have to memorize. We're not teaching them to memorize all the blends there are. There are lots of them, SP, ST, TR, TW, and so on. That's a waste of our time because blends themselves aren't graphemes. They're combinations of graphemes. So for example, in the blend BL, we've got the grapheme B and the grapheme L, each representing their own sound. Bull. We sort of blend them together because we say them kind of quickly, and it's useful for kids to recognize blends as letters that come together often, especially when they're trying to read longer words and trying to figure out where to break them into syllables. It can be helpful to recognize those blends or consonant clusters. But what we call them, in my opinion, is not a fight worth having. Fight number two. Does a grapheme or letter spell a sound, say a sound, or represent a sound? I don't think it's worth getting worked up over. Even though it's true, letters don't talk, so letters don't say sounds. I really don't think it matters. I'd probably rather have teachers say it says a sound than it represents a sound, just because that's such a mouthful. Personally, I prefer to say spell a sound, so I might say that PH spells f. But if your team uses says, it really doesn't matter. It's best to agree on something, use it across the grade, into the next grade and intervention, and move on. The third phonics fight that I don't believe is worth having is the exact order of your scope and sequence. So it doesn't really matter if R-controlled vowels come before vowel teams or if consonant LE comes before diphthongs. It matters more that you're using consistent scope and sequence across the grades and in intervention. So we don't want students following one scope and sequence in one program in Tier 1 and then switching to a completely different scope and sequence in Tier 2. That's what we want to avoid. Choose a scope and sequence and stick with it. The fourth phonics fight that I don't believe is worth having is what we call specific patterns. So for example, it doesn't really matter if you call it magic E, sneaky E. I do think it's important to make sure the name is accurate and precise. I used to call it silent E, as in cake or rake, but I don't anymore because there are so many other reasons for final silent E. If we're talking about that specific pattern where the final silent E changes the sound of the preceding vowel, then I think it makes sense to call it something like magic E, sneaky E, or CVCE, or even VCE. But just make sure that, again, that your teachers agree on what you call it, that you use the same terminology across the grades and in intervention. You might want to be careful about calling it a split digraph. According to linguist Lindstone, that's not technically precise. Fight number 5 that I don't think is worth having is what we call those sounds that come together that seem like they're sort of welded or glued. So for example, AM as in am, or INK as in sink. Personally, I like to look at them as individual graphemes and not as chunks, as in welded or glued sounds. So for example, if a child were reading the word Sam, S-A-M, I would teach them to sound it all out and flex the vowel at the end to make a real word, right? So instead of sam, we change our mouth to make it say Sam. That's actually teaching kids to flex the vowel a little bit, even in the early grades, which is important because they're going to be doing that all the way through school. And even as adults, we're going to be flexing the vowel when we try to figure out the pronunciation of an unfamiliar word. I'm noticing that the light is going in and out as I record this video, but I just take the moments that I can, even if it's a day where the sun is peeking in and out behind the clouds. So apologize for the different lighting, but let's move on. Let's talk about INK or UNK. Some programs call this another welded sound, and I've had people tell me that I'm wrong for not calling them welded sounds in the phonics materials that I have. It's not wrong. It's simply a program preference. And as long as the team agrees, both in tier 1 and tier 2, it's completely fine. It's not that one of these is right or wrong. It's just a different way of talking about it. The conversation really worth having is, are your students learning to flex the vowel? Because they're going to need to do that a lot. Even if we're not talking about welded sounds or glued sounds, think about the schwa, which is the most common English vowel sound and is in so many words. Like in the word cactus. If kids sounded it out exactly the way it looks, it would be cactus, which isn't a word, of course. So we're going to flex that final unstressed vowel to make it cactus. That's a skill worth teaching and a conversation worth having. Fight number 6 is a little bit controversial, and that is the exact decodability of decodable text. Some people like to promote their decodable text as 100% decodable based on what's been taught previously. That doesn't have to be a bad thing, but it's not necessary. Research doesn't give us a percent decodability that texts should have. And I also think it's important for kids to get used to, again, having to flex the vowel. They might come across a story word that includes patterns they haven't been taught yet. As long as they have enough decoding ability to work through that word as best as they can, they may be able to land on the exact word. So don't be afraid of words that aren't 100% decodable for your students, as long as they're further enough along in their reading journey that their first plan of attack is always to sound out the word. So now that I've shared 6 phonics fights that I don't believe are worth having, I want to address 2 fights or conversations that are worth your time. And conversation number 1 has to do with rigid versus flexible syllable division. Rigid syllable division asks students to label consonants and vowels, identify patterns, divide according to the patterns, label syllable types, and then pronounce the syllables according to how the vowels are pronounced within those syllable types. And it's true that students have absolutely had success with programs that have this more rigid syllable division. But the honest question that I have is whether all of that cognitive load and instructional time is worth it when there might be a more effective and efficient way to get students to the proper word. And that's why I'm more of a fan of flexible syllable division. And I have a video all about that. I don't remember if it's happened yet or if it's coming, but you can certainly check my channel to learn more about flexible syllable division. Flexible syllable division requires students to identify the vowels, divide the word in a way that makes sense, and then try to sound it out and flex the vowels if it doesn't quite land on a word they know. This really is a conversation worth having with your team, not only because you need consistency across the grades and an intervention, but because the lesson time and cognitive demands of rigid syllable division, I think, deserve real scrutiny. The second conversation that I believe is worth having is whether you do whole group foundational skills instruction, so phonemic awareness and phonics, or small group. I think we have to be really careful when we say that one or the other is always right. I hear some people say that it needs to always be whole group, and I just can't get on board with that. For some teachers, whole group phonics instruction with scaffolds and differentiation built in works very well, and all students are making sufficient progress. But for others, it holds some students back, and it keeps some students behind because they're simply not able to keep up. In that setting, they're just not able to get the support, the repetition that they need. So the question isn't whether one approach is philosophically correct. The question is, what do your students need, and are they getting it? Those are the conversations worth having because they're the ones that lead to real decisions that affect real kids. If you want to dig deeper into the parts of phonics instruction that really do matter, I'd love for you to join my 5-day challenge, Invigorate Your Phonics Instruction. The link is in the description below. I hope to see you there. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.